All right, breaking right now on Spectrum News, we're going to go ahead and bring you an update now from the Florida Department of Agriculture on a months-long investigation. Commissioner Nikki Fried speaking now. Let's take a listen in.
Thank you for being here this afternoon. I want to first welcome Senator Geraldine Thompson. Thank you for joining. We'll hear from the senator in a moment. In March of this year, Tyree Sampson, a 14-year-old boy visiting Florida from Missouri, fell to his death from the Eagle Drop Tower in Orlando. With the magnitude of this incident, it was important to me that the department take the necessary time to conduct a thorough investigation and get this right, which I believe that we have done to the best of our ability.
You're watching Spectrum News live coverage as we, of course, listen in on a press conference here from Florida Agriculture Commissioner Nikki Fried, Senator-elect Geraldine Thompson. They're detailing an administrative complaint against the Orlando Eagle Drop Slingshot, the ride operator we know where 14-year-old Tyree Sampson fell to his death back in March of this year. 6 counts laid out here in that complaint. What I want to do now is to break this all down for us so we can kind of get an understanding of what this complaint details. According to the complaint, count 1 says the ride operators violated state law by operating the drop tower after having modified the harness proximity sensors on at least 2 of the seats, increasing the possible restraint opening to roughly double that of the other seats on the ride and putting patrons at risk of serious injury or death. Now, this carries an administrative fine of up to $10,000 per violation. I want to go over count 2 now here. Count 2 in this complaint from this Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. It says that the ride operators, they failed to ensure that all patrons fit properly within the contours of the seat, and by allowing the patron child to ride the drop tower, even though its seats did not accommodate someone of his size and weight, that too has a fine of up to $10,000 per violation. Count 3 now, the next count right here, it says the ride operator failed to ensure that ride employees conducted the push and pull test on every patron's restraint. Now, that's another fine of up to a $10,000 per violation. Count 4 says ride operators, they failed to adequately train ride employees on all required subjects. I know that we in the Watchdog team has covered this particular issue extensively over the past few months. Another fine there on this, up to $10,000 per violation. Count 5 here now speaks to the operator violating state law by allowing an untrained operator to work unsupervised on the drop tower. That's another fine of up to $10,000 per violation. And finally, we're going to go now to count 6. It says the ride operator failed to implement an adequate maintenance program based on manufacturer recommendations and adopted standards by failing to document work performed on the drop tower. Yeah, so we are, of course, following this very extensively. All these counts include suspension and revocation of annual permits. Want to make that very clear. And we heard Commissioner Nikki Fried there say $250,000 in fine it totaled out to. That investigation report detailing a lot of violations now. Now, in that administrative complaint, the state says through their investigation, the department discovered that the respondent's inspection and maintenance record keeping was deficient. I want to go ahead and point that out to you. Now, it goes on to say that daily inspection reports showed certain inspections as having been completed by an employee who was not in fact on duty at the time of the inspection that purportedly took place. Now, a few months ago, a person complaining to be a employee, came to us complaining that they were an employee at the Orlando Freefall ride. They sent us a video that we later learned is part of the state's investigation. Now, we held off on sharing this at the state's request after talking to them about this for several weeks, maybe even a month, I go so far as to say. And at their request, we held off on showing that video and with sharing it with you or the public. Here is what our Watchdog team uncover through our investigation. Take a look. March 25th, 2022. And that's the day after Tyree Sampson fell from the Orlando Freefall ride. This is surveillance video from inside the Freefall ride property at Icon Park. The video given to Spectrum News by a person claiming to be an Orlando Freefall employee. We took this video to the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Representatives tell us that a raw copy of this video is part of their overall investigation. Scrubbing through, things look pretty routine, but take a close look. Here's where things get a bit interesting. Two people who the Department of Ag believes were hired by the Slingshot Group are looking at what appears to be a binder of documents. One of them starts to sign and check off the document with a pen. State representatives say it appears to be signing off on work that was never completed, meaning an employee likely signed off on inspection reports without actually inspecting the ride. According to the Florida Department of Agriculture, state statute says that essentially ride inspections must happen daily. It also lays out that each inspection must be recorded on a form prescribed by department rule and signed by the person who actually conducted the inspection. The video goes on to show the person who signed off on that report then takes the folder and puts it in another area of the Freefall ride property. Again, the state says this video is all part of their investigation into the Freefall accident. After the 8-month investigation, now here's a look at how we got to this point. We want to take you back now in case you may have either forgotten or may have not been keeping up with everything. You may remember that Tyree Sampson fell to his death on March 24th. On April 1st, forensic engineers were hired to investigate his death. And about 3 weeks later, Spectrum News obtained a report about what went wrong. Specifically, that report, you may remember, detailed how the Sampson seat, how his seats and safety sensors were manually adjusted. Commissioner Freed detailing that as part of one of those complaints in her overall administrative complaint. Now, a week after that, Sampson's family filed a lawsuit alleging negligence on the part of the ride operator. In late June, Agriculture Commissioner Nikki Freed provided an update in the investigation, but the ride's future remained unclear at that point. In July, Freed revealed a working framework for a new safety law that would ramp up the state's authority to regulate rides at smaller parks. Now, last month, we learned the drop tower would be taken down for good. And that brings us to this afternoon's major update about the administrative charges that we have all been waiting to hear from and waiting to see. And, a lot of this culminating to this very event. All right, now we want to go ahead and bring in, we just heard from her, we want to go ahead and have a little bit more of an intimate discussion right now with Commissioner Nikki Freed. She is standing by ready to talk with us. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Thank you so much for joining us. Curtis McLeod here with Spectrum News. We appreciate you and just wanted to go ahead and ask you here. I know that a lot went into this report, a lot into this investigation. I mean, what are you looking for as it comes to charges? You mentioned that you submitted some information to the Orange County Sheriff's Office to consider potential charges. What made you make that decision?
Well, first of all, thank you for your continuous coverage of this very important event and this issue. Because, look, what we have to always go back to is that we lost a 14-year-old boy who had a life in front of him. And so it is our responsibility as government to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again. So we made sure that we had a very, very thorough investigation. We were not going to leave any stone unturned, working with not only our department, but we've been in constant communication with the attorneys representing the Sampson family. And so we wanted to make sure that we got to the bottom of it and figured out exactly what happened, what authorizations were given, why it was going on. But most importantly, as we were going through our investigation, figuring out where things could be better from an administrative and regulatory perspective. And so that's kind of what we have done. We've gone through this investigation. We've seen that this was an intentional changing of sensors on the harness, which allowed for larger patrons to be able to still utilize the ride, even though there was a weight requirement from the manufacturer. So as we're kind of going through these steps, we wanted to make sure that we were looking at ways to make sure this wasn't going to happen again. Once our report was done, the investigation was done, now we're taking all of this material. One, we are going to be having a fine of over $250,000 against the operator and the company, which is the largest fine the Department of Agriculture has ever levied against a corporation. We are also then going to now be able to take down the ride now that the investigation is done, and taking all the things that we have learned in the course of this and sending it over to the Orange County Sheriff's Office to further investigation to make the final determination if recommendations of criminal charges are going to move forward.
Commissioner Freed, while we have you here, I wanted to also ask you, I'm looking at this complaint here, pretty extensive here, and let alone we talk about the 750 pages here for the actual investigative report. I want to focus on one thing that stood out to me. It says here, and I'm looking at page 4 if you're familiar with this. It says, in addition, daily inspection reports showed certain inspections as having been completed by an employee who was not on duty at the time of the inspection purportedly took place. I know you guys saw a number of things that you looked into. Can you kind of walk me through the scope of this? I know that we did have a video that we got a hold of that your office confirmed to us was part of your investigation, but can you speak to that a little bit about what you guys how you came to that conclusion that there seemed to be some improprieties going on here?
Yeah, what we saw is that, that while we had done the inspection, so the Department of Agriculture has a responsibility to go out and inspect the rides prior to them starting, to make sure that everything is safe, to make sure that every screw that's supposed to be in place is in place per the operator's manual and the manufacturer's manual. So we go ahead and we do that. But unfortunately, the laws and the regulatory oversight has not given the Department of Agriculture continuous oversight and the resources necessary to make sure that we are doing spot checking, that we are making sure that the individuals who are actually operating the rides are following all the protocols. And so this is why this is a very important part of where we want to move forward, is that we get the resources necessary to do the spot investigations, to come out there and to make sure that they are doing what is appropriate per the manuals and the protocols, to make sure that the employees are completely up to speed on all of the different regulations on the operations of the facilities, and making sure that they understand the ramifications for not following those manuals and those procedures. So this is kind of what our thoughts are, is to make sure that we're upping the investigations, upping the spot checks, and making sure that we've got personnel who can come out on site, on just an unannounced basis.
I do have one last question for you that I would like to ask you really quickly here. $250,000, and it says in here or more for fines and violations when it comes to the ride operator. What do you say to people say, okay, $250,000, that might sound like a lot of money for the average Joe like me, myself, but to others who may say that this corporation could write a check and pay for that, I mean, what do you say that they may be getting off the hook here?
They are definitely, without a doubt, not getting off the hook. $250,000, this is just an administrative fine. This is just the fines that we are levying here at the Department of Agriculture. We are also not, we're making them take down the ride. We're also making sure that this operator actually has businesses across the state of Florida that will go under additional scrutiny as they continue operating here in the state. Let's also not forget that there are civil lawsuits that are happening as we speak, representing both the mother and the father of this young man. Those lawsuits could potentially get into much higher numbers on the civil side, and don't forget the potential for criminal charges. So this is just an administrative fine that will be levied. All the other ramifications, we don't take anything into a vacuum. It's all of the moving parts in collaboration with each other. So we feel that this fine, again, is the highest fine the department has ever levied against a corporation.
All right, Commissioner Nikki Freed, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. All right, now we want to go ahead and bring in Spectrum News 13 watchdog reporter Molly Durick. She has been standing by and, of course, covering this alongside me and myself. We have been working diligently, even so much so just to kind of get everything together for this report. And Molly, I want to know that, I know as we learn new details about the Department of Agriculture investigation, the Freefall incident, we're taking a close look at amusement ride safety. And I know you've been doing a lot of digging into this aspect, and of course you spoke with a ride safety expert about rules and regulations meant to ensure safety on these rides.
Curtis, one big takeaway here, states vary widely when it comes to amusement ride safety, and actually Florida ranks toward the top according to several ride safety experts we've spoken with, but that should not necessarily be a comfort according to those experts. One I spoke with who's been working in the industry for nearly 30 years told me that there are some critical gaps in Florida's laws surrounding amusement ride safety.
The state of Florida had the tools. They had the standards. In my opinion, it was completely avoidable.
I would just love your expert opinion on anything we can glean from this video as far as what opportunities there are for improvement.
Operational safety consultant Brian Avery quite literally helps write the book on amusement ride safety standards as a member of the international committee that establishes them, ASTM F24. He's worked in the amusement industry for nearly 30 years with a focus on safety and risk management. He served as an expert witness and has been published in several industry safety manuals. Now he teaches in the University of Florida's Department of Sport Management. Avery noticed a safety hazard before 14-year-old Tyree Sampson even enters the frame in this security video.
They are in the ride envelope. Based on what I can, glean from this is that the ride is operational.
Avery says the 2 ride attendants on duty that night in March shouldn't have been inside that fencing area, so close to the drop tower ride while it was still running. That's a safety hazard for them, as well as the guests. In the rare case, something goes wrong.
What they gotta appreciate is that just because you see it come down softly each and every time, doesn't mean there's not gonna be a day where the cables break on this thing or the hydraulics give out and it just goes bam to the ground and you're in the middle of it.
Avery says it's not just about these 2 individuals, but rather the training they did or did not receive.
Unfortunately, I think training in general in the state of Florida and the requirements associated with are sorely lacking.
Avery says Florida's statutory language about training is too vague. There's no requirement for how long it should last or even for attendants to read operation manuals for the ride they're running. The state's administrative complaint confirms Freefall ride attendants were never provided a copy of the Drop Tower's ride manual. It isn't long before Avery points out another problem, the lack of any signage indicating the ride's weight limit. That weight limit is specified in the ride's manual as 130 kilograms, which equals just over 286 pounds. That's nearly 100 pounds under what Tyree weighed, according to the state's administrative complaint. But the ride's owners didn't seem to be aware of that weight limit when they spoke at a presser before the Freefall first opened.
No, there's no weight limit.
Safety signage and or warning information is important for a guest to become familiar with so they can evaluate what is this ride in relation to me and or should I expose myself to this particular ride.
But Avery says Tyree wasn't made aware he wouldn't fit the ride because there was no signage posted about the weight limit. The state of Florida didn't require that signage, Avery says, because it wasn't a requirement from the ride's manufacturer. But Avery says the state should have posted the ride's weight limit anyway, in accordance with international amusement ride safety standards, the very same ones cited in Florida statute.
In there, it acknowledges ASTM as being the baseline.
Another issue that concerns Avery?
The redundancy, unfortunately, as we've learned, was just in the harness. So there was no secondary fail-safe system here.
No secondary restraint or seatbelt, despite the ride's manual specifically mentioning one. If Florida actually abided by the international safety standards it's adopted as law, Avery says the state would have required a hazard analysis for the Freefall ride, which would have likely revealed the need for a secondary restraint. But Avery says Florida skirted that requirement thanks to vague statutory language.
There's language that talks about just general conformance. There's no room for general conformance in an affidavit when you're conducting these kinds of analysis. The standard is exacting, the requirements to comply are exacting, and safety is exacting.
Statistically, the likelihood of being killed or seriously injured on an amusement ride is low. But Avery says there's more the state of Florida could be doing to diminish the risk for future riders like Tyree.
You can't, in my opinion, rationalize away someone's death and or someone being severely injured. The ones that are impacted, they need a voice that says this can be prevented and here's how we can do so. So what are we waiting for?
And as we just heard from Commissioner Freed and Senator Thompson, what they hope will become the Tyree Sampson law, they're hoping that will really flesh out some of these critical areas, some of these safety gaps, as we just heard described by the ride safety expert. One of those areas, training, was a great concern, and that is going to be addressed if this law moves forward, the Tyree Sampson law. We've learned after reading through the expansive investigative report here from the state that one of the attendants on duty that night, it was only their third day on duty. So whether or not they had enough training, this proposed law would address that, put forth much more documentation, many more requirements. Again, these requirements, as the expert says that we just heard from the ride safety expert, they should already be being followed, given that Florida does have the ASTM, the international standards, in statute. But without these requirements explicitly spelled out in statute, Curtis, there's room still for improvement of safety of these rides.
All right, now we want to go ahead and bring in the father of Tyree Sampson. Now, we've been talking with him extensively throughout the last few months here as we've been doing our continuous coverage. And Mr. Sampson, thank you so much, sir, for being with us. I know this has to be, all of this, be very difficult for you and your entire family. I know that you had the opportunity, I'm assuming so, had an opportunity to hear this latest filing from the state, this administrative complaint here. Can you tell us your immediate reactions to everything that you're hearing?
Be honest with you, Mr. McLeod, I just got in on the audio, so I'm just hearing you now as I speak. I didn't see all the other stuff you were just talking about personally.
Okay. No, that's totally fine here. Let me back up then and just kind of give you a little bit of what we know right now. And essentially, the Florida Department of Agriculture just announced an administrative complaint against the ride operators, the Orlando Eagle Drop Slingshot. They basically just said that, hey, we've done our report and we've come across the findings of our report. Several counts here that we are going to impose fines on them, and basically there could be a possibility of licensing taken away. And I guess I want to ask you, in hearing that an administrative complaint has now been filed by the state in regards to this, saying that there was in fact some wrongdoing, and this organization, according to Commissioner Nikki Freed, she said that she is going to pass her investigation over to the Orange County Sheriff's Office for the possibility of charges. What's your immediate reaction to hearing something like that?
Be honest with you, Mr. Curtis, you keep up with me. We have talked a few times over these months. To be honest with you, my son came and visited me. His spirit was under arrest because he felt like personally nobody checked him at all that night. He walked up there, put himself in the seat, however that went. They kept talking. They walked past him. He asked his friend personally to check his seat thing to make sure it was locked. He did it. His friend said something to one of the workers that night about the seat. They said, oh, it's fine. The light is on. Well, they didn't even say the light was on. It was like, everything is fine. It's okay. But when my son was going up in the air, he didn't feel the same way. Personally, my son, when he came to visit me, he revealed that he felt like his life was robbed from him personally, and it should be some criminal charges. The same people was working that night is still working at Icon Park as we speak to this day. So I don't know. I'm not a scientist or person to tell you what's right and what's wrong, but I do know what the spirit would tell me, and as long as you do right, right will follow you. And God been working on this mission from day one. Working with me, using me as a vessel, speaking for me, and using me for us to give awareness to the situation, for this thing will never, ever, ever happen to a parent again in life. And hopefully it never happen to a child again in life either.
So, Mr. Sampson, I want to ask you too here. I know that the report, it details a number of different instances in which the state alleges wrongdoing against the respondent, which is the drop tower, the Freefall company here, the Orlando Eagle Drop Slingshot company here. I want to know about your take on the fact that there was some, and we've talked about this before, some significant training deficiencies uncovered during the state's investigation, even so far as to having some individuals on site that had not received proper training and also not even received a proper training manual.
I'm gonna be honest. Going through a thing like this, as far as tragedy, me from being from St. Louis, Missouri, a lot of miles away from Orlando, I just know when I first heard everything with Ville, when it first happened, first of all, I found out through the internet video. But then when I actually found out what was going on, I actually paid attention looking at the news. I just felt like something wasn't right. You know, my intuition was like, something's not right. Follow that, your question up. About 12:30, 1 o'clock, they had a press conference, so it should be about, I think we're an hour difference. So when they had that, I think I was watching 12 o'clock news, and I was watching the day my son passed away. And I was looking at the sheriff going on a live interview and saying that it was an accident. Not even coming up with our conclusion, the evidence and everything else. I just felt like it was some fishy stuff going on. As far as the cover-up, scam, and sham stuff. The proof is in the pudding. You got the evidence right there. That everything was just wrong that night. You know, a young man almost lost his life right before that, before my son, a couple hours before my son actually lost his life. He complained to them about that same seat that my son was sitting on, saying it was unsafe. He actually told them verbally it was unsafe. And for them to allow a kid that big, 6'5", 350 pounds, just get on the ride unattendedly, not saying nothing, not doing your job, was totally unprofessional. But you know what they say, the apple don't fall too far from the tree, and you lead by example. So I just felt like from the top all the way down, it was just wrong. It was all about money.
Yeah.
It was all about a couple of $10.50, the price of admission, took a young man's bright future away from him.
You, Mr. Sampson, as his father, I know that we talked about this, and myself, a father, this has to be very difficult for you hearing these press conferences as after press conference and talking to you over and over about this. How are you and your family holding up?
Me and be honest with you, me and my son's mother, we trying to put this thing together the best way we know how. I think she trying to do her thing the way she needed to do it, and I'm gonna do my thing the way I need to do it. But the way to do it, the way to make things feel better around this time of year, as far as the holiday seasons, is I'm planning on having my first annual coat drive. It's gonna be in East St. Louis, in a low poverty-stricken area, and our goal is to give 100 coats away. This will be my first holiday season without my son personally, which is very disturbing, but I still have to continue on with his legacy. And maybe a child won't have to go to school or walk in the cold without a jacket or a coat. So I'm gonna do my part, Mr. Curtis, to try to make a better way for the youth. And I can connect with them, and maybe we can get something going for us on my son's legacy, something bigger than me and him put together.
I appreciate it, and we appreciate you, and you know, our hearts go out to you and your family. I know this is still very difficult for you all to have to kind of hear and listen to all this, and thank you for chatting with us. We appreciate it. Mr. Yarnell Sampson, Tyree Sampson's father, speaking with us from St. Louis. And now that the investigation is finished, they expect the Freefall ride to be torn down. Spectrum News reporter Asher Wildman is live in Orlando right now for us. And Asher, go ahead and give us a little bit of a breakdown. You're there live on the scene where, of course, all of this began, all this take place. What are you learning there now?
Curtis, standing by the phone right now, as you mentioned, that Slingshot working on that statement. I've just been told that they're going to try to get us something very shortly. They are working up an email to let us know what their thoughts are following that press conference held by Nikki Fried. Also, we've reached out to Icon Park here in regards to some of the things that Nikki Fried just touched on. For instance, will there be more signage now required? What kind of training measures will they ask tenants, whether current or new coming in? What will potentially be here when this tower gets taken down? When will that tower get taken down? These are questions that we have asked immediately following that press conference. We know that they're working and efforting trying to get us an answer now. Slingshot says they'll have something for us shortly, but it's now Icon Park. We're also waiting to hear that information from it. Also, we heard in that press conference, Nikki Fried is recommending criminal charges be sent over to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. So a lot of questions now being asked by us here, and that's what we're going to hopefully have for you later tonight on our 5 o'clock news. Reporting live in Orlando, Asher Wildman for Spectrum News.